So something to be said about having differing skill sets, same mission, same unifying concept can be very, very fruitful when there's unity and when there's coherence around that singularity. I think can be very, very powerful.
Welcome back, everybody. Thursday again, Hard Hat CEO. It's time to get in here and talk about a few things. And today we're going to talk about how to make lemons into lemonade. And I'm going to tell you what, it's important because everybody has those things pop up that we don't know what to do. And my special guest all the way from Austin, Texas is Ari Rastegar. And he's the author of the book, The Gift of Failure. And he's very successful in real estate, which you all know I love. So please help me welcome Ari. Ari, how you doing today?
Doing great. Ready to go back and man my lemonade stand.
There you go. Hey, can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into that and other
Sure.
things you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an attorney by trade, and I started a real estate investment company about 11 years ago, and we've invested in 38 cities, 13 states, 7 different asset classes. We're based here in Austin, Texas, which is my hometown. I migrated around for school, did some time in New York City, spent some time in LA, but Austin is definitely home. And our investors across these businesses are public pension funds, insurance companies. We have a very, very large book of kind of accredited investors as well. And we're here doing some really cool stuff.
I think I told you I don't really have an agenda when I start my podcast, and I was going to start with a different question, but now you done piqued my interest. So we talk about real estate here and investing and so forth. How do you decide to go into that many different cities and states? Is it just a deal?
Yeah, it was the deal. So I started really as a fund to fund. So, it was really just me and my investor in the entertainment company that I started before this, that you'll read about in the book, hence The Gift of Failure. It blew up, and thank God it did, because I wouldn't be doing what I was kind of born to do. But he is one of the most decorated financiers in Wall Street history. I mean, he's done close to $500 billion in financing. 500 billion.
Wow.
Think about that number. And so since he was my investor, I ended up spending a lot of time with him and his friends and his people, his family. And so I developed a lot of relationships with great operators, that he was in business with or he knew all across the United States. So when I started raising capital kind of from high net worth folks, I had access to incredible deal flow, which allowed me to get massive breadth very, very, very early on, in all different, from storage, industrial, multifamily, you name it. And then as those things started to sell in 2016, 2017, we were able to take that capital and start buying our own properties, buying our own land, and building a fully vertically integrated firm.
So in all the books that we read about, if you're improving yourself and if my listeners are listening, and if you haven't been reading some of those books, you need to, and I'm sure The Gift of Failure is going to be one of them. But my point being is, you surrounded yourself around successful people, sounds like. How much did you learn from them, or how did it just come naturally that you absorbed it, or did somebody take you under your wing?
I'm a avid reader. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so my degree is actually in English literature. My undergraduate degree is English literature. So I've literally read for a living. So, being an attorney as well, attorneys are,
Always, yeah.
are readers also. And so my dad gave me a copy of the book Think and Grow Rich, when I was 13 years old, which fundamentally changed my life. And in fact, if you do end up getting a copy of my book, which is not the great American novel by any stretch of the imagination, at the end, I put a pretty comprehensive list of books that I either talk about or ones that I recommend that are kind of in this space. So, even if you don't read my book and you do pick it up, just go get that list at the end of it and read those books. And I think it'll put you in a good position. But but proximity is power. We attract, power, good power or bad power. We attract ultimately, what we are. And I know that might sound corny to some people, but I'm a big meditator. I'm very, very much into, that our thoughts are things. And if you read all the great books in the space, you tend to see that. And you look at your circle, if you look at your life and you're not where you are, and you start auditing your thoughts, which might seem a little bit more difficult, but it's a lot easier to audit your surroundings and the people that you spend time with. So if you don't like where you are, or if you like where you are, both, and you can say, oh, I hang out with XYZ people. These are the people I text message daily with, I email daily with. This is the content I consume in my social network interactions. And that tends to tell you who you are at this place in time. And obviously, you have the power to change that. You have obviously the power to course correct that and learn from it. But usually, the people that you're surrounding yourself with, the books that you're reading, the content you're consuming is very much a representation or a mirror of who you are at any given moment in time. So if you want to change who you are, that's one of the places to start.
So obviously, I'm guessing that you've had some. I hate the word failures because you've had some opportunities to take some less desirable positions and turn around to your favor or learn from those and move forward. Probably, what was the first one that kind of really drove home to you? Said, "Man, this is a turning point for me."
I mean, I think to your point about failure, I agree with you. For me, my definition of failure now is
Yeah.
learning how to win. That's what it means to me. So when I hear that word, that's what I'm thinking is learning how to win. And if you look at anybody that's learned anything in life, from a toddler, learning how to walk, to becoming a contractor, or building a family, or starting a marriage, whatever you're doing, there is failure along the way, because that is how you learn how to win. You try something and you make a mistake, you're learning how to play the piano. Watch a young kid learning to play the piano, and it's super clunky. They're pushing a button, and then they get it right, and then they try it again. And so there was a time when, as a society, we started to re-signify failure as a bad thing. So even as you say it, you have to give the caveat, and I understand why. I've said, I
Yeah.
hate to use that word, in reality, because of how we've really bastardized the word, like
Because
we've
it's like you
destroyed it
said,
in
it's
the
all about
word.
thinking. It's
You're
it's how
right.
you think about it, how you
You're
perceive it.
right. You're right. And I totally agree with you. And I think that's just fundamentally inaccurate, and a very destructive way to use a beautiful word that is like the inherent part of how human beings certainly learn specialized skills. So with that said, anything that I've ever done in my life, failure has been an inherent part. But I've broken up different failures, different categories, to the different categories of my life. Health, being one of them, because look, if you want to achieve anything meaningful in life, you're going to need energy. You're going to have to have energy to do those things. And the biology of the human body, food, exercise, oxygen, water, there's certain amount of ATP. If we can get into the esoterics of your energetic fields and all these kinds of things, and I'm down that rabbit hole as well. But simply spoken, what you eat and how you operate and how this body operates very much dictates what you're able to do. People, who we've become a culture that sits, and sitting, a lot of us know back pain. And when you have back pain, it's hard to think about something for doing really deep work when your back's hurting. If your
Hmm.
stomach's hurting, or you got a headache, or you feel exhausted and stressed, emotionally, physically, it's very hard to do very comprehensive work, that requires focus. So I started to learn that, at being a college kid that was delivering pizzas and flipping burgers and just trying to make ends meet. You're eating whatever you can, and kind of that younger body is much more forgiving, as we start to get older. But somewhere at the beginning of this business, working 120-hour weeks, or whatever the hours were. I mean, all day, all night, sleeping in the
Sure.
office. As a lot of founders know, I started to hit a wall, and I wasn't feeling good. And um, uh, I didn't even know how bad I actually felt, to be perfectly honest. But one of my investors, one of my early investors, is one of my best friends in the world. His name is Dr. Jacob Rosenstein. He's a brilliant spinal neurosurgeon that kind of decided to create like an age management practice, because he found himself in his mid 50s, fat, overweight, feeling like shit, and using that big brain of his to figure out how to optimize with nutrition and hormones, and this, that, and the other. And And he got me on the right path. I grew up in a household that was very health conscious, so I'm very fortunate, to have, a dad that really understood, just things before they were popular, like being vegetarian. And I'm not saying you should be vegetarian, but just thinking about, health
What you're
or
putting in your
massage
mouth. Yeah.
therapy, yeah, chiropractics, exercise, posture. So when Dr. Rosenstein kind of shared it with me, I was familiar with it, but changing my health first physically and seeing a dramatic change in how I felt, how I operated, how I could think about things, how I could work, the relationships, how I could build them, and then taking that into dealing with mental health through meditation, through other spiritual practices, and then watching how the business just absolutely exploded exponentially, because our business as founders are, very much an extension of us. Over time, the relationships that we have, how we build them, how we show up, the kindness that we have, or the lack of kindness, the impatience, the stress, all of things come because when you're building a big business, you're building relationships. And if you show up feeling like shit, chances are you're going to build a relationship that's like shit. And so so that was a huge failure that became one of the greatest blessings and gifts in my life. I'm 43 years old. I've never felt better in my entire life, in every single area. And so much of that has to do with health. And I know it sounds corny, but health is wealth. If you don't have you don't have shit. If you don't,
Yeah.
if you're feeling bad, you ask someone that is healthy, that's been blessed enough to be healthy, they have a million dreams. They have all these things they want to do. But you ask someone that's sick, they have one dream, and that's to feel better. And so I urge everybody that, is either in that place, you can change it, you can fix it. There are places out there. And before you start to really build a huge business or anything like that, you got to make sure you got the energy to do it. You can have the best car in the world, but if you don't fill the tank up, you ain't going nowhere. Or if you don't charge the battery, I guess you're not going anywhere,
Right.
or whatever analogy you want to use.
Now you mentioned earlier, toddlers, we got to learn to run before you walk or walk before you run, I guess. But everybody falls down and you got to get back up. So what in your mind, or how do you teach your people that there's going to be setbacks? How do you view those setbacks, and what do you learn from them? And then how do you turn that to like an advantage?
Well, look, I think there's there's technique, and then there's mindset. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you need both. Okay. You can have, all the technique in the world, and not show up and have a good attitude, and nothing's going to happen. We see this in sports. Or you can
Right.
have all the best positive outlook and mindset and no technique, and shit doesn't work either. So
Doesn't
so
work.
you need both. And so I think a huge part of it, that I think in order, is attitude. I think attitude absolutely comes before anything else, because if you have an attitude that is around growth, that is around contribution, that remains curious. And people that are very curious, as a general rule, want to learn. And if you're curious and you want to learn, that's kind of inherently saying that you don't let your ego get too much in the way, of
Right.
thinking you know everything. Because in a world that's changing this rapidly, the one thing we know is that things are going to change. And I think overall that's a good thing. But we all know the folks, and myself, but I was definitely in that list, I think, for most of my life, of, I thought I knew how to do something, or I was stuck in my ways, and of this is how this is done, or this is how it's always been. And as a business person in this day and age, you either innovate or you die, period. There's no in between. And either you're growing or you're dying. We see that in nature. And so I think it's very important, to focus on that mindset, and focus on ways to develop that curious mindset. And you very much can learn it and cultivate it. And it goes back to the people you hang out with, the type of content you consume, reading biographies of people that have done it in the past, and you see their failures. You see how every great anybody of anything, from great parents, great teachers, great business people, great athletes, great leaders, they failed. This is the one thing they have in common. The one thing they have in common is they failed, and then how they dealt with it, the introspection of the time they took to figure out what went wrong, why it went wrong, and then formulated an attitude of not the poor me, Why is this happening? Everything is happening to me. They start to come to realize that life is happening from them, not to them. And so when we start to change that attitude, a pretty magical thing starts happening to where the world around us changes as well.
It's you got to be objective and perspective. I think what how I sum what you just said up, because it's not happening necessarily to them. It's not personal. It's just something that happened that you got to overcome and make changes, or changes in direction, or whatever that looks like to
Well,
you.
it's going to mean whatever you want it to mean, and I
Yeah.
think that's the other part because I believe that we're very much creators of our lives and not necessarily managers of circumstance. If you think everything you do is about duty, then it's going to be about duty. If you think everything you do is about joy, it's going to be about joy. If you think that, no pain, no gain, you're right. So whatever you think, you're right. And,
Yeah.
and, and I think at this point, I would like my meanings because you're right. There's an objectivity and there's a certain set of facts. And one of my favorite Supreme Court justices, said that, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but
Sure.
they're not entitled to their own facts. So you have to find a place where, as you said, you can have perspective and be wildly objective about certain things, but you as a person can choose what that means, and so you can take any scenario of, a child of divorced parents can say, oh my God, my parents divorced, so I'm never getting married.
Hmm.
That's one meaning. Or you can have a child of divorced parents and said, "Oh, my parents divorced. I'm never getting a divorce." And so so what things mean to you and your ability to change the meaning of them will elicit a feeling or an emotion. And whether we like to admit it or not, we are beings of emotion. Emotions and feelings are part of what makes us human. I think so far that's the thing that the robots won't be able to do yet. And if we can use these tools and these objectivity pieces to create these types of sentiments and feelings that allow us to grow, allow us to give, to build ourselves up, to give and contribute more, because great business is about being obsessed with your customers. Period. Hard stop. If you can do more for your customer than anyone else on the planet, you're going to keep a customer, period. And right now, figuring out how to do that and the way to do that for your customers and give them more value, in my opinion, is to care more than anybody else. And caring, if you distill caring a little bit more, there's some heart and there's some sentiment that goes in that one way or another. So I think there's a science to achievement, but there's also an art to fulfillment. Same thing goes for building a great business. You're gonna have to put the heart with the math in some way, shape, or form. And the ones that do that become the Walt Disneys of the world, become the ones that last the test of time because they were able to balance and synthesize both the mind and the heart.
How do you take that, and how do you balance the vision to the making it happen?
Look, this is this life is an experiment and an experience. Okay, you experiment, which means you try something,
Hmm.
and then you experience something, and you do it again. So I am by no means an expert in any of this, other than fucking things up. That I'm really good at.
Are you good at
Really,
that?
really good at fucking things up. But coming up with how exactly to do it, I'm not entirely sure. But I can say in my limited experience that this game of life, this game of business, this game of achievement, is happens between the ears. It's an inward game. It's a
Hmm.
psychological game, and however you can learn to train your psychology. And there's a million of folks out there that have all sorts of different techniques. And I'm a student of this game. I've done a lot of work with Tony Robbins. I've done a lot of work with Dr. Joe Dispenza in meditation. I'm an avid reader, an avid learner of uh, anybody and everyone that has some Napoleon Hill, you name it. And I think they all have different techniques, but so much of the science of it is, yes, acquiring the knowledge and learning and watching podcasts or YouTube and listening to the greatest minds in the world around what you want to do. And there's a science to that, putting in a certain amount of hours and getting knowledge and gaining specialized knowledge, becoming an expert like in a craft or a trade as an electrician or a plumber or a lawyer or a doctor. But then the other part of it of how you do it, I think is an art, and it's so highly personalized to your values, your upbringing, your particular intelligence, emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, mental, and so that part, you got to find it on your own, and that's part of the journey is, you figuring it out and learning it is how you become the person that can actually achieve it and hold it. So, there's the books and the knowledge will, get you through the door, but how you go about doing it is how you stay in the room.
Here on the show, I talk a lot about building teams and so forth. And you mentioned values, and the values you got to identify for yourself first,
I think so.
and then make sure when you bring that team on, those teams share the same values. Because if you have conflict, that'd be a hard thing to do, and your customers will see that too. I mean, bring the right customers team on as far, if you have somebody's opposite the values you have, you're going to have conflict.
Yeah,
And
well, conflict depends how you look at it, right? And I think I know what you're saying, and
sure,
just like looking at it from a slightly different angle, the airplane takes off against the wind,
hmm
friction, look, can friction be very destructive? Absolutely. But putting, the tire to the road, that friction is what gets the car moving. So in my point in my life, as a founder in certain seasons, having people that are very aligned, a very singular vision, that share all the same thought process is incredibly valuable. But then there's another part to be said around surrounding yourself with people that have differing opinions, different values, same
yeah,
mission, same
fair enough.
objective, but very different approach. And I found in my life surrounding myself now with people that look, if you put an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, a priest, a rabbi, a motivational speaker and something all in a
And
room.
an insurance agent.
Yeah, an insurance agent, in a room, you're gonna, you're gonna have some folks that have some very different opinions about things. But if they're very aligned in the same thing of, serving a person, taking care of
hmm
something, I find that those differing opinions, those different backgrounds can be so fruitful because you end up seeing the blind spots that you didn't even know were there, and so enthusiasm can be tempered. You can focus in and find different approaches, because I find that being very focused and very stern on what your goal is very powerful, but being flexible in your approach is also incredibly powerful, because thinking this is how we're going to go do it, great. You should know kind of what you want to do and why you want to do it, and how is none of your business. How should permeate and could come along, but knowing what it is and why it is, I think, are profoundly more important.
I've talked about in the past, and that's how you're right. I've got like Christine, for example. She's the exact opposite of me, but there's times where she sees things that it's like, huh, never thought about it that way. And
And that's what you want, and that's what you
yeah,
want, and if and I'd be remiss to tell you I would enjoy people telling me something I'm wrong about or something they see, and I'm working on that. But I can say for the mission, when you're mission driven, and you're culture driven around something, you need different, and looking at building a house, right?
right.
We both love real estate, and real estate is a great analogy for this. You're building a house. You need the banker, to come up with some of the cash. You need the investors, but you also need, the construction worker. You need the landman. You need someone to pour the concrete. You need someone to put up the framing, the roofing, the sheetrock. And these are very different tradespeople, right? Like they have
hmm
very different expertise, but and they come in the room, they work together. You have this beautiful house that, when a family then moves in, becomes a home. But it's that differing opinion, differing perspectives, differing skill sets. I doubt you could get your, get your suit banker from Wall Street, on the construction site with a hard hat on, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that guy, you might not have part of the money. But if you also don't have the electrician, there's not going to be no lights in the house. So something to be said about having differing skill sets, same mission, same unifying concept, can be very, very fruitful when there's unity and when there's coherence around that singularity. I think can be very, very powerful.
That same mission. You said that very well because everybody has to know what everybody else needs. They just don't necessarily need to know it exactly or don't need to do it, be
That's
able to do it.
that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's right. And then having people, kind of knowing where your superpower is, knowing, what you do and having the humility to know that, if you're a great electrician, you don't need to be a plumber, but you damn sure need to find a good plumber. And you need to
Yes, sir.
recognize that you need a plumber. You need to recognize you need them, recognize their value, have respect for their trade, their craft. Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman did not play the same position, but boy, did they respect each other.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of hesitancy before Rodman came from the Pistons, to the Bulls,
Yeah.
but they knew they needed it. And he was an eccentric dude, color in his hair, doing this, that, or the other. But Michael Jordan knew that if they didn't have that kind of intensity, they weren't going to win rings. And so knowing that, was he down there posted up in the center and having all the extra eccentricities of Dennis Rodman? No, but without Rodman, I don't think that team really existed. And so my point is there's positions to be played on the court. And if everybody understands their position, and they work together through a singular goal, singular mission, I think you're going to be holding up the trophy at the end of the season.
Absolutely. I have one last question before we wrap it up. And I was doing my notes here, and one of the questions maybe suggested and asked you about. So if you had to start from zero, and some of my guys do, and we talk about a lot of my guys that are listening, I'm talking about, get out of that hard hat, become your CEO, move forward. And then you say, well, how do I do that? Well, you generate some money for sure. But if you were limited on things, what would you do if you were starting over, starting any business or a founder?
If you're starting over from zero, I think the one of the most important things is take some time to educate yourself. Because if you're starting from zero, that means you have a lot of time. So you don't have nothing, but you got time. And
Yep.
in a digital world where knowledge is so profound, where you can go on YouTube and hear the greatest, minds in the world in your craft and your trade and the thing that you want to do, take some time to have some definite purpose of what you want. Like, what are you trying to achieve now? Like, what is that? And then digitally get to know the people that are doing it, and get to know and spend the time doing it. And then once you've gone through the digital pipeline of filling yourself with all that knowledge, knowing what you want, why you want it, then move that into the physical sphere and go find a person that is doing it in your area in something and make yourself indispensable to them. Do whatever work you can. Humble yourself to if they'll just let you drive them. Drive them. If they'll, pick their kids up, I don't know, if you can be their secretary, whatever you can do to get proximity to a person or an organization that is doing the thing you want after you've spent a certain amount of time digitally educating yourself, digitally surrounding yourself by those people. I think that proximity has real inertia, creates real power. And then, slowly you let the cookie crumble, so to speak. And I think you'll find yourself in a better situation.
Thank you, Ari. So, Ari, where would they be able to find your book at? Amazon
You
and all
can
that good stuff?
Yeah, you
Go
can
ahead.
buy the book, The Gift of Failure, on Amazon. Or you can listen to it on Spotify. You can get the
Oh, yeah.
audiobook on Audible. I did the audio, myself, which was
Hmm.
painstakingly, but hopefully it'll give some value. I love listening to books that, the author, did the audio themselves. I think it has a little bit of power to it. I
Me
certainly enjoy
too.
it,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, so you can easily find that. You can learn more about us as a firm at rastegarcapital.com, or a simple Google search of my name or Rastegar Capital. You'll be able to find us in various areas, on LinkedIn, Instagram, the various social networks as well.
We'll make sure those links are down in the show notes below. Thank you, Ari, for today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody, this is Chris G here. If you like what you heard today, please hit like and subscribe. Always push that notification button if you get a chance. This is Chris G with Ari, Hard Hat the CEO. God be with you till we meet again. Bye-bye.